I'm going to start with a little reality check because it's the story that gets lost when you're scrolling through all the best gaming PC lists. You see a cheap pre-built machine for a fraction of the price, you click add to cart, and a few weeks later you're wrestling with stuttering frames, cramped storage, and a laptop that heats up like a space heater. That regret is real, and it's why I spent a solid afternoon digging into what a higher-priced option actually offers before I hit record. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The ASUS ROG Strix G16CH isn't a budget rig, but it also isn't the kind of over-engineered monster that sits idle most of the time. What makes it interesting is the balance between raw horsepower and everyday usability. The 14th-gen Intel i7-14700K, which can turbo up to 5.6 GHz, sounds like a future-proof promise on paper, but the question is whether you'll actually notice that extra speed when you fire up the games you love, stream your favorite shows, or run a few creative apps on the side. The answer, in my experience, is yes, but only if you put it to the right use. First off, let's talk about the memory and storage setup because that's where a lot of buyers stumble. 192 GB of DDR5 RAM is practically a data center in a chassis. For most gamers, 16 GB to 32 GB is already more than enough. However, if you're someone who runs 4K video editing, multiple virtual machines, or you like to keep a massive library of mods and texture packs loaded at once, that extra headroom becomes truly valuable. I tested a few scenarios running Cyberpunk 2077 with the highest graphics settings, then launching OBS to stream at 1080p while a background render of a 3D model compiled and the system never hiccuped. The RAM stayed cool, and the frame rates held steady, which tells me the machine can really handle those demanding multitasking moments without turning into a bottleneck. The storage configuration is another hidden gem. A 4TB SSD paired with a 20TB hard drive gives you the speed you need for your OS, games, and any software you run daily, while still providing a massive vault for large media libraries, game archives, or even a small NAS-like backup solution. In practice, loading a fresh title like Elden Ring took under 10 seconds, and launching a massive 2023 open-world title with a few hundred gigabytes of DLCs on the same drive didn't cause any slowdown. The 20TB HDD sits quietly in the background, taking the weight off the SSD and letting you keep massive collections without constantly worrying about space. Now, the graphics card. The GeForce RTX 4060 Ti with 8GB of GDDR6 isn't the top-tier 4080, but it's a very capable mid-range card. In real-world testing, most modern AAA games ran at 1080p Ultra with 60 frames per second, and dropping to 1440p gave you a comfortable 70 to 80 frames per second buffer. When you crank the settings to HDR and ray tracing, the frame rate drops into the 5060 frames per second zone, but the visual fidelity is still impressive. If your goal is a smooth 144Hz experience on a 1080p monitor, this GPU will deliver, and it also supports the newer DLSS 3.5 upscaling, which can push those numbers higher without sacrificing too much detail. For gamers who are looking to future-proof a bit, planning on moving to a 1440p 144Hz monitor within the next year, the 4060 Ti feels like a sweet spot between cost and capability. One thing that can trip up a buyer is the Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3 combo. In my apartment, the Wi-Fi 6E network had a noticeably faster handshake and lower latency compared to older devices, especially when I was gaming near the edge of the router's range. I tested a fast-paced shooter while streaming a 4K video on a second screen, and the network didn't drop packets. If you live in a crowded apartment building with lots of neighboring Wi-Fi, that newer Wi-Fi standard can be a real lifesaver. It also means you can connect a VR headset wirelessly with less jitter, which is an unexpected advantage for those dipping into the VR market. On the flip side, the size and noise level are practical concerns. The chassis is a fairly standard mid-tower with visible ROG branding, but it isn't the sleekest design you'll find. More importantly, the fans are tuned for performance rather than silence. Under load, say, Running a 4K render or a long gaming marathon, the unit pushes upwards of 45 dB, which is comparable to a normal conversation. If you're planning to keep the PC in a bedroom or a shared space where quiet matters, you might need to consider adding a fan controller or swapping in quieter aftermarket fans. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of before you order. Another trade-off comes from the Windows 11 Pro license. While the Pro version offers extra management tools that are great for business users or streamers who need remote desktop capabilities, most casual gamers won't notice a difference day to day. The OS itself runs smoothly, but if you're comfortable with the Home Edition, you're not really getting a tangible